Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the 7 books that I read in March. March was an okay reading month for me. I definitely think I read a little bit more than I was expecting, but not as much as I was hoping. And genre-wise, I was a little bit all over the place. So I had one sci-fi, one paranormal romance, one dystopian romance, one rom-com, one historical fiction, and 2 fantasy books. Common theme being romance, but it still just felt a little bit scattered. I had some books that I enjoyed. I do think I enjoyed a lot of what I read, but some I wasn't a super big fan of. So the very first book that I finished was an audiobook that I listened to, and this was Fan Service by Rosie Danan. Within this book, you follow Alex, who is kind of an outcast of her small town in Florida. And growing up, she was a very big fan of this show called The Arcane Files. Think of a show similar to like Teen Wolf or Vampire Diaries. It's more of a paranormal show. And the male main character in that is played by a man named Devin. He is now kind of like a washed up actor. Like, he's not really booking any jobs. He really wants to try to get a reboot of the Arcane Files because that was the only thing that he was really known for. But one thing leads to another, and Devin is actually maybe turning into a werewolf. And he is kind of freaking out, but he decides to contact someone who is a super fan of the show that might be able to help him, and that person is Alex. So he ends up contacting her. He actually goes, sees her in Florida, and tries to have her help him navigate this potential werewolf situation. Like, maybe he's turning into a werewolf. I listened to this when I was kind of struggling getting into anything. Even like, I wasn't really enjoying audiobooks, but I was like, you know, I eyed this book a little bit when it came out, but the hold line was really long at the library, so I was like, whatever, I'll just put it off for later. So I saw it was available. I was like, okay, might as well, seems silly and fun. And that's exactly what it was. It was silly, it was fun. I had a pretty good time listening to it. It wasn't anything groundbreaking or show-stopping, but I had a good time. It was entertaining. It kept my attention. I loved Teen Wolf growing up. Watching that is like one of my favorite shows. So it definitely did kind of give me a similar vibe to like that show. So if you like Teen Wolf or like Vampire Diaries, you might like this book. I don't know. I had a pretty good time. It wasn't anything crazy. The next book that I read was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I gave this book 4.5 stars, and I actually really loved this book. Within this book, you follow our female character, Ryland Grace. He is a middle school science teacher, and within this version of the Earth, there is something that is going on that is basically causing the sun to get dimmer, and he is tasked with doing the initial like experiments on the thing that is causing the sun to die. And eventually he wakes up in the beginning of this. He realizes he's not on Earth, he's actually in space, and he is the sole survivor and has to potentially save the Earth. He has to figure out why he was there, like kind of the whole backstory of like leading up to it, because he doesn't have any of his memories, and save Earth. And I mostly read this book because the movie was coming out, and I had been seeing a lot of good things about this book, so I really wanted to give it a chance because I have never read sci-fi before. So this was my first ever sci-fi, and honestly, I was very nervous going into this because I wasn't sure if the writing was going to be very sophisticated or very just hard to follow along with, but it was not. It was very funny. Right off the bat, I was laughing. It was very comedic while also being very heartwarming of a story. Don't get me wrong, the science aspects completely went over my head. There were some things that I was like, okay, this sounds familiar to me, but then I would look certain things up and I'm like, oh, this is actually a fictional made up thing. It's not real. And I thought it was real. But you really don't need to fully understand the science aspects of this story to fully enjoy it. So I really enjoyed this. I really had such a great time reading it. I really wanted to know what was going to happen. I thought it was a very satisfying ending as well. Well, one thing I was like, okay, I kind of wanted to know, but I still really loved this. I know so many people have loved the audiobook. I did not listen to that, but if I ever do want to reread this, I would definitely consider listening to the audiobook just because of how highly I've seen it praised. And I will say, I saw the movie. I really enjoyed the movie, and in my opinion, I thought it was pretty book accurate. I had picked out, like, as I was watching it, I was able to find some things that weren't in the movie that were in the book, but I still thought it was a great movie, a great book. I had such a fun time reading this, and there were so many points I wanted to cry at the movie. I don't know why. It was just very good, very well done. The next book that I read was Daggermouth by H.M. Wolfe. I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed this. This is a dystopian romance. Within this book, you follow Shadira, and she is a assassin on the outskirts of like this society. So within the society, there is the Heart, and all the elite members of the Heart, like the president, they're his children, anyone that basically lives in the Heart has to conceal their identity and wear a mask, like a full face covering mask. And people on the boundary are very, very poor. They're slowly not getting food delivered to them. And so Shadira is tasked with assassinating the president's son, who is called the Executioner. His name is Grayson. And so she goes into the Heart, she infiltrates it, and one thing leads to another. She's unsuccessful, and she ends up having to go into this arranged forced marriage to Grayson. This story is incredibly dark. Just when you think the characters' backstories can't get any more rough, they do. It is very, very heartbreaking, all the things that they have gone through. Very hard to read. Not hard to read, but it is like, wow, like that's a terrible thing that you've gone through. If you don't like that, or if you aren't prepared to read that, this might not be the book for you. But overall, I thought it was pretty interesting. I liked getting to see the progression of the characters because a lot of them in the beginning have a very black and white view on the world where you're either good or you're bad, or you're either on this side or that side. But you slowly see them realize that that is not the case. I think the author did a great job of portraying that because you do see them slowly come to this realization. I had seen so many people talk about how crazy the ending was, and there was like one kind of thing I suspected, but the other thing I was really not expecting. I am very, very interested to see how the next book is going to play out. I don't think it's coming out until next year, but overall I was very, very interested, very engaged. I was buddy reading this with a friend, so it was fun to just go along and be like chatting back and forth about what was going on because it was just funny. Certain things. So I had a great time, just overall great experience. I'm interested to see what's going to happen next. The next book that I read was City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. I listened to the audiobook of this and I gave this 2.5 stars. I know so many people love the Shadowhunters and the whole like Mortal Instruments Shadowhunter world, and I really wanted to enjoy it, but I did not. I felt like I had to force myself to listen to this, and maybe it's just because I was feeling slumpy as it was, but I struggled. Within this world, you follow Clary. Clary's mom has been abducted, and she meets these other kids her age, and they are Shadowhunters, which are basically half human, half angel, and they kill demons. You can only see them if you're a fellow Shadowhunter, and Clary was not raised as a Shadowhunter, so it's kind of unbeknownst to her why she can see them, because she really shouldn't be able to see them if she's not a Shadowhunter. So things progress from there. She's trying to find out what happened to her mom. I just felt like the writing in this was very juvenile, very young. It just, and then like some things that were happening towards the end, I'm like, ugh, that's weird. But I just also found the characters to be annoying. I'm not sure if I'll continue reading this series because I know so many people love it that I feel like maybe it will get better as time goes on, or maybe I should go and read, I think it's like The Clockwork Angel is the first book of like the prequel. There's so many books in this series, it's confusing, but I'm unsure if I want to continue. Maybe I'll listen to the next book through the library, see if it's something I'm interested in. If it is, then maybe I'll keep reading. I don't know. But as of this first one, it was rough for me to get through this. The next book that I read was The Secret World of Briar Rose by Cindy Pham. I so graciously was able to read this as an ARC. It's not out yet, but I am very grateful that I was able to read this. I did not give this book a rating, and I feel very conflicted about my feelings for this book because I have been watching Cindy's booktube videos for years, like since I had just gotten into reading, and that was a very like when I was an early teenager, I was watching her videos, and I love her videos. I think she's so funny, and I love her commentary on things, and so I was so excited going into this book, but I just think this was not the book for me. I will say I think it was a pretty interesting concept. This is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. The equivalent of Sleeping Beauty has been asleep for around 100 years at this point, and the whole kingdom is being overtaken by enemy kingdoms. And the main character follows her sister into the Sleeping Beauty's equivalent of her consciousness, and they have to try to wake her up. But I just think that this book felt very, very slow to me, and I had trouble connecting to any of the characters. I do think that Cindy's writing is very beautiful. It's very flowery, it's very lush, but I think that that might have played a role in me feeling bored because it just felt very slow. Everything felt over-explained. And granted, they were beautiful descriptions, but I just was kind of over reading it over and over again. The main character and her sister, your was supposed to have this super strong bond, but I just didn't feel it fully. So I just struggle because I really wanted to love this. I think the cover is stunning, beautiful, but content of the story, I just struggle to fully feel invested in or, pull towards. So I don't think it felt right giving this book a rating. Maybe when it does officially come out, I can get the physical copy or an e-copy and try to reread it, see if it's clicking better with me then. But I think I was just looking for something more fast-paced, and this felt very slow-paced. Maybe that's where the disconnect came in. I unfortunately did not like this very much. The next book that I read was How to Write a Love Story by Catherine Walsh. I listened to the audiobook of this and I gave this 4 stars. Within this book, you follow Kira, and Kira is the daughter of a very well-known, beloved fantasy author. Her father, who was the author of this series, recently passed away, and he left her with an unfinished draft, or really, and just an outline, of the very last book in this series. And the only person he wrote was able to finish the series was Kira. She's living off the Irish coast and is really struggling to find a direction or a way to take the story. When her publisher notices that she is struggling, they decide to send out Sam, who will be the editor of this book, in hopes to kind of have him help kind of direct her, any just support that she might need. But I, first of all, thought the cover was super cute when I saw it, and I thought that the premise was pretty interesting and unique, especially because Sam is a huge fan of this fantasy series, so you kind of see how he knows the books very well. And I do think that Kira's sense of apprehension in writing this book, just because she has been judged by the fans of the books before, so I think that that felt very realistic and like something that seemed like it could actually happen. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was super cute, super sweet. And this was my first ever book that I've read by this author, but I would definitely consider reading others. I think all of her other books are on Kindle Unlimited. I just don't think this one is. And the very last book that I read in March was The Secret Book of Flora Lee by Patty Callahan Henry. I gave this book 2 stars, and truth be told, this book was painful to get through. I had seen like a mutual read this book on Goodreads, and I think they liked it, so it was on my radar. I saw it at a secondhand bookstore, so I was like, okay, let me try it out. I thought it would be a good book to buddy read with my mom, and we did buddy read this together, but I struggled so hard to get through this. Within this book, you are following 2 different timelines. You're following one during World War II, so I think 1940s it was, and then you're following 20 years later in 1960. You're following our main character, Hazel, and her and her sister were a part of the, I forget what the program was called, but basically taking children from London to Oxford so they wouldn't be in the main part of the war going on. They stayed with a woman named Bridie and her son Harry, and while they're there, they're just living their lives. But Hazel and her younger sister Flora, I think they're around 5 to 6 years apart. Hazel makes up this story, this fantasy land called Whisperwood, in attempts to just kind of take Flora's mind off of the war going on and just take her somewhere else to a different place. One night, Flora goes missing. It seems that she might have fallen into the river, but they're not really sure where she went. No one was ever able to find her. So 20 years later, Hazel is working at a used or rare bookstore in London, and she comes across this book called The Tales of Whisperwood, something along the lines of that fantasy land that she created for Flora. And this sends Hazel on a spiral of what if Flora is still alive, and trying to figure out, one, where this book came from, how this person got the story, and it just goes from there. You're following dual timelines and kind of a slow explanation of what kind of happened that night, but this was so boring. In the beginning, I saw some promise and I was like, okay, this seems pretty interesting. But it was just the same thing over and over and over and over again, said in different words in different ways. And it was so boring. And I think as the story went on, Hazel became like more and more unhinged. I was like, girl, what are you doing? I understand that you want to find out what happened to your sister, and I understand that this is the whole like pinnacle of your life, is trying to figure out what actually happened, and I understand that. But she was just making these decisions that I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you're not making a very good choice right now. And I was so thoroughly disappointed by the reveal of what happened in the end. It just felt so like, and nothing was questioned. Like, you get the reveal and it's like, okay, this is what happened. No characters are like struggling with the fact, like, it was just so, it seemed like everything was just boxed and bowed. But in reality, I don't think it would be like that as much as it really was portrayed as. So I did not like this. I was so happy to have it over with, honestly. It was so difficult for me to get into and to fully care about. Not for me. Those were the 7 books that I read in March. Overall, I had a pretty decent reading month. I had a couple duds, but everything else I liked fairly well. And if you've read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments, or what your favorite book that you read in March was. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!